Thanks for joining. We'll get started in just a few minutes to have everyone join in. Thanks for joining. My name is Cassie Rowe, Content Marketing Specialist at 451 Research. Today's webinar, Cloud Transformation 2019 Preview, will be presented by William Fellows and Melanie Posey. Before we dive into the content, I just want to give a brief introduction to 451 Research for those of you who aren't familiar with us. 451 Research is a top-tier research and advisory firm headquartered in New York City. Our team of more than 100 analysts cover more than 2,000 technology vendors and service providers every year. 451 Research provides unique insight into emerging disruptive technologies and the companies taking them to market, and deliver that insight via syndicated research, advisory services, and live events around the world. Now, before I turn it over to Melanie and Whiff, just a few housekeeping items. The webinar slides can be downloaded in the resources section of the On24 platform. There is also a link there where you can download a complimentary excerpt of the 2019 Trends Preview report associated with today's presentation. You can also submit questions to the presenters in the same platform for the Q&A at the end of this webinar. There will also be a recording available shortly after today's session. Without further ado, Whiff.
Hey, thanks for that kind introduction, Cassie. And actually, I encourage you to enter questions as we go along, and between the two of us, we'll be able to think about some answers to them. So thanks for taking the time today, wherever you are, morning, noon, or evening. So this is one in a series of 29 previews that happens from the 451 Research channels. So myself and Melanie both work on the research channels associated with cloud and digital transformation. So the 9 research channels that we operate go from the data center core to the edge, and you can see cloud transformation there squarely amongst those. So today's preview is not the work of Melanie and myself only, but indeed the contributions are from the rest of the analyst team as well, including our 2 doctors, and they're happy to follow up with anyone on their particular area of expertise. So cloud becomes a teenager in 2019, and like the song of the same name by the band Sweet, you know, as it becomes a teenager, you know, there's a teenage rampage going on there, and you know, really the question is how long it is before cloud is completely in command here. What I wanted to do was just heads up the material by providing a couple of quick hit data points to kind of reflect on where we are now in 2019. So, and we'll double click on these as we go along. But firstly, cloud is quite clearly becoming the venue of choice. And in fact, 73% of folks said that the primary workload deployment environment by 2020 will be cloud. But we should temper that with our understanding that in terms of use in the enterprise, only about 25% of the folks in our enterprise alliance are at a broad and mature implementation, which suggests the majority of the opportunity is still in front of us as the mainstream of the market undergoes a conversion to cloud. So the second thing is that that while the use of public cloud is now nearly at 50%, and another, I think 13 or 14 have it in plan for through this year, which means it won't be long before it will be in use of about 2/3 of organisations. But of course, as the use accelerates, as organisations understand, that it allows them to do things faster, it's not necessarily going to let them do it cheaper unless they are able to optimize their deployments to prevent runaway costs and so on. Our 451's Cloud Price Index, part of the Digital Economics unit here now, is tracking well over 500,000 SKUs or stock keeping units from the major hyperscaler vendors. So, trying to choose the optimal configuration of services to get the best performance is going to require some additional science here. So I'm going to turn it over to Melanie to hit up a few other data points. Melanie?
Thanks a lot, Whit. And in keeping with the progression of cloud inside the enterprise, one thing that we'll see as an important factor going forward is access to talent. It's all well and good to be in the cloud, but there's a problem when you get there and you don't quite know what to do or how to do the things you need to do. So one thing we're seeing in the market is that 90% of respondents in our 451 Alliance are seeing skill shortages in some of the key cloud disciplines. And the thing that's interesting about this, and we'll get to it later in the presentation, is that it's not so much the basics of cloud, how to set up a cloud server, how to set up storage buckets. The higher level types of talent are in short supply these days. How do you leverage containers? How do you leverage Kubernetes? How do you get that DevOps mentality going in your cloud environment? This is where the puck is going in terms of what people need to know how to do. And access to developer talent is being seen as a pretty big constraint. To some extent, even more so than capital is a constraint for the development of the IT environment and digital transformation overall. And the next aspect of this is just the magnitude of the market that we're talking about here. The market value is accelerating. We're looking at $143 billion in 2019 for the cloud hosting and managed services market. And next we'll get into a little bit more detail on that. And on this slide, you can see what our forecast is for this cloud hosting and managed services market, and we're looking at a CAGR of 14% through 2021. And one of the interesting things to point out here about this is that we're moving from the era of cloud building to cloud consumption. And what we mean by that is while the infrastructure piece of this cloud hosting and managed services market is continuing to grow, it's starting to account for a smaller and smaller share of the overall pie. And that's what we mean by cloud consumption overtaking cloud building. People buy services rather than build their own platforms. And as we move into this era where cloud is the new deployment approach for IT resources, what ends up happening is the infrastructure function is still there and it's still important, but it becomes invisible to the user. So what this means is a lot of hosted cloud and on-premises infrastructure, in effect, becomes a service. And we see the breakdown of each primary sector in 2018. They're all kind of approaching parity. So going forward, we'll see a different configuration there where the managed services and also the applications start to make up a larger piece of the overall pie. And with that, I'll toss it over to Whiff to tell us about the multi-cloud era and cloud working as advertised.
Hey, thanks, Melanie. Yeah, we're going to be passing the baton to and fro here. I think everyone on the call, on the webinar, will understand that the world is moving towards a multi-cloud environment. But how to get cloud working, if you like, as advertised, is going to be an interesting problem set because really cloud management has become very complicated because of the jumble of clouds and containers and different venues and so on and so on. And delivering the benefits of speed and scale is getting harder, especially as deployments work their way out. So we think that 2019 we're going to see a focus on approaches which can resolve the complexity here and deliver some of these benefits. But so who needs cloud management then? I guess depending on which vendor or hyperscaler you speak to, you will often get a different answer. But it's usually pretty self-serving in terms of where they're coming from. The fact of the matter is that pretty much everyone is going to need some cloud management. And this is data from Melanie's digital pulse survey in the Voice of the Enterprise service. So what it's showing here is the double click on that 73% number that we showed earlier on. So over the next couple of years, there's going to be a pivot towards the use of cloud venues as the primary workload deployment venue. And you can see that the use of on-premise traditional IT infrastructure declines within that. And the beneficiaries here are not only public cloud, but also private cloud. And of course, we've seen a great uptick in the use of private cloud for particular use cases. There's a massive land grab underway as all industries and agencies are now converting because companies can respond more quickly to changing customer needs and deliver value faster. So, as Melanie said, it's really about cloud consumption overtaking cloud building here. As a result, really then multi-cloud becomes the new reality, and we can see here that there's going to be a wide range of different venues, if not vendors themselves, in in use as they are already. But like in life, a lot of this is going to happen, by default rather than by design necessarily, and it's really driven by the need to try and derive and deploy the best execution venue for each workload. In other words, that for every class of enterprise business IT need, there is a platform that best delivers performance, security, cost, or other time to market considerations. So the current sweet spot really is the delivery of managed services, including cloud management, to support this conversion by sort of offsetting or mitigating the cost and complexity and disruption and providing governance. And ultimately, we believe the more effective service providers themselves are, the cloud providers themselves, in supporting the overall transformation journey, the more right it will have to play, if you like, in the ongoing and the long-term management and optimization of deployments. And the market generally looks like this today. There are broadly two kinds of activities: cloud readiness in the orange there, which is all the kind of pre-flight and then boarding and onboarding activities, and then cloud governance, all of the post-convergent management and optimization. And it's really cloud governance where the real prize is in terms of the revenue opportunity, and where and that's what's really in front of us now. There's a lower barrier to entry in cloud readiness across all dimensions, and there are lots of managed service providers in the market with less differentiated offerings, but they're chasing lower margins and lower returns at a lower risk. The cloud governance piece is The capabilities are higher risk, but they offer a higher, rate of return. And the question is, what represents the better investment? So the use of cloud management platforms, so about 50% have them either in use or in plan, and they're predominantly those that are offered by the service providers that are in use as well. The problem is that each, the cloud service providers each have their own unique dashboards and APIs, and all kinds of technology suppliers are now offering management platforms as they sort of battle to control service delivery to enterprises. And what users really need is a unified view of the IT estate with management and orchestration approaches that optimize the use and deliver developer services too. Whether it can be delivered in a single tool, though, I think is still playing out, because a single pane of glass that we hear so much about is a bit like a universal remote. Having just one control for all your devices is a lot more convenient than having multiple controls, but each device has its intricacies that can't be captured by a single control, and the result, you're likely to have to keep your old remote control for, well, as we know, channel tuning or configuration and so on. So that, if you like, the single remote can do a majority of things, but it won't replace everything, because that would make the single control too complex and reduce its advantage of simplicity. And the same issue lives with the single cloud pane of glass. They can do all the common things, but they're not so good at the differentiated features, and they risk becoming a single glass of pane as a result. So making cloud work, as advertised. So one of the things I think that needs to be encouraged is the development of support for mobility. So moving applications and workloads and data between environments is not going to be a one-time event. It's going to become a standard IT practice. It's if you like, a revolving door rather than a boomerang. We're seeing that the use of APIs is driving massive consumption. So, why do I need 10, different service desk, interfaces when I can just go through ServiceNow, for example? The demand is for APIs. There's also an opportunity for cost saving here. Actually, our cloud price index shows that if you were to actually select the cheapest amongst the couple of dozen services that make up the CPI, you would save yourself a 75% cost over the market rate. But no one is going to choose 24 different services from different vendors, let alone be able to manage them. But it gives you an idea of the kind of headroom and the opportunity for innovation in the market. Approaches that can deliver self-driving clouds in terms of the use of BI analytics, I guess now more machine learning and sophisticated automation techniques to better plan and predict the mix of cloud services to meet needs is going to be useful. I mean, you could build all these tools, you could build tools yourselves, but the investment and the time and the skills that you need is really going to be out of the reach of most of us. So with that, I'll hand it back to Melanie to talk about Dr. Casey Ring's key issue and trend for 2019. Melanie.
As Whiff just mentioned, that the time and the skills to invest in this type of control plane is out of reach for most folks. So therefore, we're starting to see IT service providers come a lot more to the fore. And last year, we talked about the platform revolution in terms of the transformation in how service providers deliver value to customers. This year, what we're seeing is an even further development of that as systems integrators and consultancies and business process providers continue to reimagine the way they support customers. And the way they're doing it is increasingly through using intelligent platforms. This provides a view of enterprise software, which is typically what you think about when you get into the realm of IT outsourcers. And as we've said about other applications, these are moving to cloud environments. And we're seeing the same thing with a lot of the core enterprise software. And what we're focusing on here from this data is Oracle and SAP. And we see the move to cloud delivery of these core production applications gathering pace as organizations move from traditional on-premise internal infrastructure environments to a variety of different environments. And as was mentioned previously, this is not necessarily all going towards public cloud. There are a lot of other types of cloud environments that we're seeing migration towards. And one thing here that's a little bit different when you talk about enterprise applications is that a lot of the early movement towards cloud was a simple lift and shift from the cloud. And this kind of approach reduces infrastructure costs, which is all well and good, but it's not really enough in itself to help organizations become more agile and more flexible. So when you get to the realm of enterprise enterprise software, what you're finding is that you need a more radical migration to realize all the cloud benefits of reduced infrastructure and more agility and flexibility. And as a result, one thing we're seeing is organizations moving towards the SaaS model and the ISVs having to essentially redesign their software for cloud delivery to take advantage of not only the benefits of the cloud infrastructure, but the expanded range of things you can do in the cloud, such as advanced analytics, machine learning, and automation that plays into the overall value of the software itself. One thing you can see pretty clearly from this slide is that the old school application outsourcing approach is not the way forward. You see those pretty small numbers up at the top for organizations that are going to be running their enterprise software in an IT outsourcer environment. And one thing we're seeing is that this is prompting the global consultancies like Accenture and Capgemini to develop intelligent platforms that bring together the consulting knowledge that they have around technology and the various vertical industry domains with the business expertise in the software, complemented and augmented by enhanced AI and machine learning. So this new approach to IT outsourcer-enabled application outsourcing runs on the cloud, either on a SaaS environment, an IaaS environment, or in a hosted private cloud environment. And the next thing to look at here is this whole idea of the intelligent platform approach. And this supports the enterprise IT organization and also the specific applications by bringing together different methodologies, domain expertise, and technologies in an end-to-end process that's a little bit like a production line. So you have different phases of the project outlined in the diagram on the right. And it's quite similar to WIF's cloud management wheel of fortune in the sense that the starting point of whatever desired business outcome you have is achieved by a collaborative effort from different teams using the same platform to assemble all the knowledge, software, and processes you need to actually deliver the business outcome. So how do you prepare for this whole intelligent platform approach? A couple of recommendations here is that if you're an IT service provider and you don't already have some kind of intelligent platform in place, you need to either buy it or partner with somebody to provide that foundational capability. Also, enterprises who are embarking on enterprise application migration projects should look at the ERP to platform approach to assess how it could transform the speed of moving to a cloud-native development cycle. And then finally, specialist ISVs need to be embedded in the application marketplaces of the big enterprise app vendors so that they can be guaranteed ongoing enterprise growth within this platform services landscape. And with that, I'll toss it back to Wes.
Hey, thanks, Melanie. I just wanted to take a step back or up, or just have a think about this in the context of what's going on at a more sort of at a higher level here, because I think a lot of the motions and so on that we've sort of looked at here, both technology, economic, and the organisational piece, sort of leave us thinking about how these things can be industrialized to, deliver benefits that are more than just a series of events, but lead to sustainable business value derivations. So, and this is some of the work that Carl Brooks has been working on in the channel. So this is a factory from the early industrial revolution, lots of machines that amplify human labour. And as the services, options and availability of IT infrastructure proliferate, one major trend that's just begun to develop will continue strongly in 2019 and beyond. And that's the kind of a massive overhaul of how IT is consumed and operated in models that become even more standardized and hands-off and industrialized. And the seeds are there. We standardize power equipment and racks and chassis components and hard drives, and of course data centers look a lot like factories in many ways. But the next wave is going to happen in software and operations, and we think that it's going to happen in three major ways. So in order to get the levels of efficiency and connectivity necessary for the trends we're highlighting here, industrialization has to come to IT, and it has to come across infrastructure and cloud providers and on into enterprise data centers. That means homogeneity. Primarily, everything has to work the same way, not at the hardware level, but in software. And we're seeing, Azure Stack and AWS Outposts and VMware on AWS and Alibaba Aspara as a kind of response to this need. IT has to perform the same function and get the same outcome across all environments. And that means that we'll see more and more efforts to make IT more homogeneous across providers, vendors, and enterprises at runtime, not just in the stacks and in racks. So this is where we are now. I think this is the factory. It's much more efficient and repeatable than the previous one, but it's still full of people. And that's really what's going to change. And that's why, 2019, we're going to see an emphasis on solving that problem. And this is how. So automation has kind of reached its limit in DevOps with scripts and workflows and so on. And the next step is to make those processes subject to inspection and automation that thinks for itself. Of course, within safe and reliable parameters, and so that it can make the changes necessary faster and more accurately than a human can. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not the kind of thing that most people associate with machine learning and thinking machines. This isn't, winning Jeopardy or letting your, order socks from the bathroom or goods from the fridge, but it is where improvements have to be made. And once platforms are as compatible as they can be, machine learning has got a really big role to play here in speeding up outcomes and reshaping what we think of as work in IT today. In 2019, it's going to be a year when these kinds of techniques rise into view as the beginning, really, of a long-term trend here. These are some of the companies that we cover in the research. It's not an exclusive list, but there are many of these folks out there who have been tinkering with this stuff, but now it really looks as though it's going to come into view in 2019. I guess one of the issues is that the network is a major sort of choke point for IT right now. Most enterprises still rely on massively expensive copper and clunky frozen MPLS and WAN architecture and so on well, really the cloud services providers, sort of breezed past all that stuff a decade ago. Major carriers have invested in SD-WAN services in lots of fundamental ways, and for them, 2019 is really going to be a proving year for how well they can cater to an audience that's, if you like, suddenly aware it doesn't have to, want to deal with a network that doesn't have the same faculties of its own, of its own compute infrastructure. And platforms like NSX and ACI in bridge mode have become a way for enterprises and service providers to put a step change in efficiency and more configurability into the network, which are the most conservative and fraught area of IT operations to change. And SD-WAN has been proven at massive scale, and I think 2019 will see its adoption rise in prominence, especially when autonomous smart operations tools are telling them, that they're missing out. So tomorrow, we're talking here about robots in the factory. That is today's, industrial reality, and where in short IT's headed for service providers and the enterprise. From enabling people to do sort of labor-intensive things in data centers to freeing them from it entirely. In 2019, we'll see the rise of apps that don't care where they are, networks liberated from the data center floor, and automation that can, if you like, help itself. So one of the aspects of this software makeover, if you like, is also going to play out in the telco and operator market, where these folks are making themselves over with virtualized technology in order to try and deliver the benefits of the opportunities of 5G and edge and so on. And really, telcos move slowly, but when they do move, they move as an army. And the infrastructure refresh required for 5G and edge is the perfect opportunity for new, would-be telco suppliers to make their moves here. We think the addressable market for the virtualization piece of telco software-driven infrastructure is going to be alone north of a $10 billion opportunity. There's a really major disruption playing out here. The old business models are breaking down, and technology is taking a major sort of leap forward, driven by the software in terms of analytics and big data and AI, virtualization, NFV, VNFs, SDN, and cloud-native fungibility, with containers and so on to the edge. And the basic value is no longer being able to do the network service provision better. It's in enabling businesses to do things they could otherwise, never think about doing by themselves in an on-demand and, in an easy-on fashion. I guess the integration of silos of IT and network operations is really the critical step that telcos are going to have to undertake to support this kind of transformation and become more than mobile or more than fixed, becoming digital service providers. And it's all contextualized in terms of the cloud delivery, of these services. But the change really has got as much to do with the sort of deep-seated culture and organizational change in the carriers as it has to do with technologies. They typically can't get out of their own way, right? That's been their problem. But it is predicated on, this software-defined makeover. They're going to need a holistic approach, consistent strategies for the next 5 to 10 years in terms of operationalizing and automating these. Because in future, everything's going to be, everything will be considered as a workload and will be packaged as a VNF, and via a scientific process, it will be sent to the most appropriate venue for processing, whether that's an edge device, a data center, a mobile, or whatever. So this is one of the trends which really is going to accelerate in 2019, especially as the vendors vie for this kind of virgin market opportunity, if you like, that's pretty huge out there. One of the aspects which I know some of you have touched on in the question box also is the extent to which cloud to ground or on-premise developments are playing out here. And so I'm going to turn over to Melanie now to talk about precisely that.
Yeah, we'll be talking here in this section about the infrastructure homogeneity that we've talked about before, about how IT has to perform across all environments. And what we'll be talking about here is the hyperscale cloud providers ramping up their efforts around cloud to ground, basically bringing cloud down to earth and into the data center. And this is some data from my colleague, Jean Atelsik. The first thing to look at here is that we're kind of going back to the future in the sense that the hyperscalers are reaching back down into the enterprise with on-premises and hybrid offerings that essentially take these enterprise workloads and bring them into the cloud environment, but doing that on-premise. So organizations like AWS, what they've done is package their cloudwares from whether it's the entire technology stack in the case of Azure Stack, or individual database, compute, and storage services, or container management platforms in a way that can be consumed on-premise, either in an enterprise facility or in a locked-up part of the cloud data center itself. And the case in point here is Amazon Web Services Outpost, which was announced a couple months ago. What this does is allows qualified customers to put AWS hardware in their own data centers or in a managed facility. And the interesting thing about this is a commercial necessity for AWS because as we've been seeing increasingly in our research that some data and operations just have to stay on premises, whether that's for compliance reasons or just cultural reasons or simply because it's too much trouble to refactor it to work in the cloud. And AWS announced Outposts pretty far in advance. GA isn't expected to happen until the second half of this year. So effectively what they're saying is AWS is coming for your on-premises workloads, digest that idea, socialize it internally, and get ready for it in the second half of this year. And this highlights the whole idea that on-premises isn't going anywhere. As we showed earlier in the presentation, a lot of the cloud migration is actually happening through on-premises cloud environments and also in hosted private cloud environments. So off-prem and public cloud are not necessarily the sum total of how cloud basically reshapes the IT landscape. And one thing we've shown in our cloud price index research is that private cloud is getting cheaper and it's getting better. We saw managed private cloud pricing fall by 22% last year. And at the same time, we've seen vendors make their on-premises cloud offers more cloud-like. And the table below has some examples of various public cloud benefits and on-premises infrastructure-based solutions that provide those same benefits, but without having to lift and shift to an off-premises public cloud environment. And as you can see in the table on the right, that we're maybe getting to a point where adoption is leveling out a bit in terms of on-premises private cloud adoption starting to stabilize a bit as we've also seen the growth curve of IaaS public cloud slow down a bit. And just to clarify what's going on there with IaaS public cloud, it's not necessarily that IaaS has become less valuable. To some extent, it reflects the issues that Whiff brought up earlier about, how do you get to that next level of cloud? And a lot of enablement services are going to be needed to get everybody to that point. And another way to look at the hyperscalers coming down to earth is we're seeing point services and software take some of the same trajectory where the capabilities are being brought on-premise into private data center environments. We're seeing customers start to demand versions of software, whether it's open source and container-based developer tools, or even traditional software taking part in this trajectory. In recent months, we've seen this trend expand to include particular cloud services, service providers, and cloud-native software vendors. And what we're calling this is a SaaSification in reverse, where a lot of these capabilities are now available on premises. And if you want, you could call this whole trend SaaS backwards if you want to. And this has propagated traditional on-premises applications being able to be accessed both in the cloud and on premises. And here are a few examples of some of these applications we've been talking about and how they're available in both on premises and public cloud environments. And with that, I'll toss it back to Whit.
Hey, thanks, Melanie. I was just looking at some of the questions that have been coming in as we go along, and in the context of what we were talking, or what Melanie was talking about just now, there were questions around, so what kind of data and operations should stay on premise versus going into hosted environments, and that's essentially what Outposts is there to do for those organizations who are still risk averse in terms of wanting everything to go into public cloud. This thing becomes a way for them to try gain the benefits of public cloud on premise, but more important, as AWS sees it, is really just an interim step to get familiar with it before going into their cloud. So guardrails, if you like, or an on-ramp more than anything. So both Jean and Owen work in the Digital Economics Unit on the Cloud Price Index, and one of the things which we see coming into view in 2019 very much more specifically is not only optimization, but optimization as a service. So being able to bring the ongoing optimization to deployments as a service, and really because as I referred to earlier, the enormous number and variety of venues and services and so on that are now available, it takes more than anyone with just a cloud PhD in economics to figure out how, what's the right combination of things to use if you are, if you're a buyer, and how to price those things and package them in order to enjoy the premium pricing if you are a supplier. So one of the things that we've done is to map this opportunity onto the enterprise cloud transformation journey, which some of you may be familiar with, and if you're not, quite happy to make this available. So, we've used the kind of conceit of different novels to capture the transition through these different stages. So, this is this goes from sort of cost savings in terms of the Great Expectations, Wuthering Heights and War and Peace, sprawling cost, to really taking back control in optimization over on the right. And what we've done is to map the way service providers are currently delivering value to enterprises across this journey. So migration, cloud management, and hybrid to cloud optimization. So in the first instance, 85% of service providers already offer migration, so it's not really a differentiator here. And hybrid support is cited amongst the top three sort of claimed points of differentiation by service providers. So that's not really a sort of a key differentiator either. But the next opportunity really that is going to be enjoyed or on the table here is really around optimization. And at the moment, the demand for optimization is outstripping supply. So 37% of enterprises have told us that they want performance guarantees on SLAs, but at the moment, so for example, that's only offered by 18%. Excuse me. And 33% of service providers include cost optimization, but there's actually 42% of enterprises are looking for this to be supplied as part of their service. So there's clearly an opportunity gap here. Service providers have got to invest in monitoring technology and support teams and improve SLAs to address this optimization opportunity. So, we think that this optimization of service really is going to add a lot of value to deployments through 2019, and we're going to be tracking that in the Cloud Price Index and the Digital Economics Unit. Now, I guess the direction of travel for the industry now is it's pretty clear that the wind is in the sails of containers and serverless and microservices and Kubernetes and so on. But as with previous cycles of new and emerging technologies, there are some pretty significant challenges still to be addressed. And this is what Melanie's going to be covering in this final section, because really we do think it's going to be a really key constraint. Melanie.
Thanks, Cliff. And definitely as the cloud model enters its teenage years, as often happens when you become a teenager, you go in thinking you know everything there is to know, and you really do find out that there's quite a lot that you don't know. And one way that we're characterizing this era now is that folks are now coming to know what it is they don't know about how to leverage cloud as a way to take their IT transformation further and to use that IT as an engine for broader digital transformation. One way to look at all of this is that in 2019, we'll see a surge in cloud upskilling. And as I mentioned before, the basics are covered. People know pretty much how to do basic IT in the cloud at this point. But what is lacking is how to do more advanced types of things, and not just related to the nuts and bolts and ins and outs of containers and microservices and Kubernetes and all of that, but how do you take all of those capabilities to dramatically transform the workflows inside of organizations, and also to transform service creation and delivery, all the things that provide value to an enterprise's customer base and fuel this larger transformation process. As Liz said, cloud native has become the direction of travel for enterprises, especially in this hybrid world of increasingly interconnected on-premises and cloud IT resources. But the pace of this transformation is being dictated by the cost of and access to skills, which is now becoming a pretty big constraint for organizations, both in terms of tactical day-to-day IT operations and longer-term digital-focused planning and execution on the business side of things. And so to get there from here, in the sense of how do you take old school IT into the newer age of IT-enabled business transformation, there's going to be upskilling and outsourcing required. And this provides a view of some of these roadblocks that we're seeing towards this whole idea of optimized leverage of cloud to drive the business forward. And some of the skills that are in shortest supply are some of these higher order skills, like cloud architect. How do you use cloud to transform the way you deliver IT and the way you deliver business value? Cloud platform expertise is another big thing, as we've got lots of platforms out there with the hyperscale players and also some of the SaaS providers. That's a lot to learn and a lot to integrate at some point as well. And that's one reason we see cloud orchestration and management as one of the big cloud skills in shortest supply. One way to take a look at how far we've come in this journey is in 2016, when we first started asking these questions about cloud skills gaps. Only half of organizations said that they had any cloud skills gaps at all. But when we recently reran the survey, what we found was 90% of folks are reporting skill shortages in some type of cloud-related discipline. And so in the next phase, what we're going to see is that, cloud maturity, requires building capabilities around integration, orchestration, and some of the particular platform-specific skills that the various hyperscale providers have in order to bring it all together into a new style of IT estate. And just a quick view on this. Some of the cloud expertise upgrades that are on deck for 2019. And essentially what we're seeing is an enhanced focus on the platform certifications and, some of these transformation-oriented types of projects. And one thing we're seeing here that's interesting is that pretty much fewer than 50% overall of organizations have cloud-certified professionals on staff. So one thing we'll see in 2019 is organizations starting to formalize cloud skills with the various platform certifications, AWS, Azure, Google, and others. And while this isn't the norm right now, organizations will start to add these certifications to their toolkits. And notably, 20% of large organizations plan significant increases in the number of the cloud-certified staff they have in 2019, as seen by the graphic on the right that outlines cloud-certified staffing plans. And to wrap up, I just wanted to reiterate this whole idea in the cloud transformation space, is that we're getting to the point where we are well beyond infrastructure at this point. Cloud-native feature adoption plans are quite strong among the organizations we survey on a quarterly basis in Voice of the Enterprise. And we're seeing a lot of incremental uptake of some of the advanced platform functions like containers, like business and analytics, and serverless compute functions, and particularly machine learning, that these are all on deck for 2019 as organizations take their cloud environments to the next level. And the shift is towards some of these transformation-oriented functions and using the cloud-native constructs to get there to the next level of digital transformation. And finally, one thing to point out here is that the question is, in a way, no longer if cloud is described as a separate IT category, but how long that will be the case. And as every organization becomes a service provider of some sort, the consumption of cloud services will take over from cloud building as the primary driver of IT spending. Cloud simply becomes IT, IT simply becomes cloud. And we look back to 2006 when AWS was first founded. It's hard to imagine at the time the change that would have been brought over these 13 years. And it's also hard to imagine how much more things will change in the next 13 years, but rest assured, they definitely will. Thank you very much, and I think we can start the Q&A now.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Whiff. And thank you all for joining us again. So we do have a few questions left. We did address some of them directly, but the first one I have here is, what are some examples / names for specialist ISVs?
Well, some of the specialist ISVs we had listed on the slide in that particular section. These were related to some of the point services and software in the whole SaaSification in reverse movement. And, some of these specialists are in the areas of, things like security and workflow for open source development and some of the cloud optimization type services that Whiff mentioned. And on the kind of functional IT side of things, a lot of that gets into really industry specific types of applications from ISVs, things that are particular to healthcare or education, for example. And that's where we're seeing a lot of functionality shift from on-premises to a SaaS-based consumption model for those industry-specific type applications.
Hey,
Melanie, another. Oh, sorry, Whiff.
Sorry, go on. No, you go on.
I was just going to go to the next question, but.
So a number of folks have had questions on what are some of the services that are going to attract premium pricing when it comes to optimization as a service. And what I've told a couple of folks is to be in touch so that we can actually provide them with the breakdown list of which services are commanding an above a market rate for delivery. So I can just tell you that incident response time guarantees and SLAs on individual services come top of the list in terms of the premiums that that enterprises are willing to pay at this point. But again, if you contact us afterwards, we can set you up and give you those list of those specifically.
Melanie, the next question is for you, and it's also about ISVs again. This person would like to know if you can say more about ISVs that need to be embedded within marketplaces to participate in growth, and perhaps if you could provide an example.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't provide a specific example, but I think one thing you have to consider is that you've got marketplaces like AWS Marketplace being increasingly the place where organizations go to procure the applications that they're running on the infrastructure in the cloud. So I think that it's not a question of whether it's a good idea for an ISV to be embedded in one of these marketplaces. It's increasingly becoming a necessity. And I think one of the things we'll see in the coming year or so, as Whiff mentioned in his software-defined part of the presentation, is that making it easier for ISVs to participate in multiple marketplaces, in effect, by having the APIs and the connectors and the adapters that make software broadly consumable across different hyperscaler platforms. But again, for the person who asked this question, this is something that we can get into further online if you want to contact us after this event.
Great, thank you, Melanie. So looking at some of the other questions with and Melanie, is there one more you want to do? Because I know your time is valuable and we're about to come to the top of the hour.
Well, so let me just sort of finish up. We've got a whole pile of questions left here that we're not going to be able to get to just on the call. But I'm happy for us to answer them directly or amongst the team if you want to just capture those and email those to us, and also we'll provide the data points to support those as well. So we didn't obviously double click into everything that we talked about here, but it does all come from our research, the primary research with our enterprise, with our customers, and from the supply side as well. Do you want to wrap up, Cassie?
Yes, and thank you. And I will make sure that any of the questions we did not address get over to Wes and Melanie, and they will follow up with you sometime after today. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time to listen to what we believe are the 2019 trends that will affect cloud and cloud transformation. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, and have a great rest of your day.
Have a good evening.